1 baby was a secret. 2 was a scandal. But triplets are a bloodline. I tried to run from Milwaukee at 6 weeks, thinking the north woods of Wisconsin would hide me. But Elliot Martin doesn't lose property. Now I'm trapped in a gilded estate in Lake Geneva, surrounded by silk sheets and armed guards, carrying the 3 reasons he'll never let me go. My name is Lydia Morgan, and this is how my attempt to escape the Mafia Boss became a life sentence. The apartment in West Allis smelled like burnt coffee and regret. Lydia sat on the edge of her second-hand futon, staring at the 2 pink lines that had just shattered her entire world. The plastic test clattered to the floor, rolling under the radiator that hadn't worked properly since November. Outside, someone's car alarm wailed into the gray Milwaukee morning, but she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the single word hammering through her skull. No, 6 weeks. It had been 6 weeks since that night. 6 weeks since she'd made the worst decision of her 24 years and let Elliot Martin pull her into the coat check room at his cousin's wedding reception. She told herself it was just stress relief, just one night with a dangerously handsome man who'd looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. She'd convinced herself that men like Elliot Martin, men who wore $10,000 suits and had blood on their hands, didn't remember girls like her. She'd been wrong. The business card sat on her coffee table where it had lived for 6 weeks, mocking her with its thick cream cardstock and embossed lettering. No company name, just a phone number and 2 words in elegant script. Call me, E. Lydia grabbed her phone with shaking hands and opened her banking app. The number glowed back at her like a cruel joke. 847-23. That was it. That was everything she had after rent, after groceries, after the electric bill she'd been putting off. She did the math in her head, the way she'd been doing it for the past 3 days since she first suspected. Prenatal vitamins, doctor visits, maternity clothes, a crib, diapers, formula. She couldn't finish the thought. There was no math that worked. No scenario where a waitress from West Allis could afford to raise a baby alone, especially not when that baby's father was the most dangerous man in Wisconsin. I'm saving them from a monster. The thought crystallized as she stared at the business card. She grabbed it, walked to the kitchen and held it over the flame of her gas stove. The edges curled and blackened, Elliot's phone number disappearing into ash. He would never know. She'd make sure of it. Tomorrow, she'd drive to the clinic on the east side, the one she'd looked up last night at 2 a.m. while lying awake in the dark. She'd take care of this. She'd take care of herself. She'd do what needed to be done. And then, she'd forget Elliot Martin ever existed. The clinic waiting room was colder than she expected. Lydia filled out the paperwork with numb fingers, checking boxes that felt like tiny deaths. Medical history, last menstrual period, insurance status. She'd laughed bitterly at that one and wrote none in capital letters. The other women in the waiting room didn't make eye contact. Everyone here was carrying their own private catastrophe. Lydia Morgan? The nurse's voice was kind but professional, the tone of someone who'd seen 1,000 stories just like hers. Lydia followed her down a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and fear, into a small exam room with a paper-covered table and a machine with a dark screen. We'll just do a quick ultrasound to confirm the pregnancy and determine how far along you are, the nurse said, handing her a gown. The doctor will be in shortly to discuss your options. Options. Such a clinical word for what she was about to do. Lydia changed into the gown and lay back on the table, staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles. She thought about her mother, dead 3 years now from the same cancer that had bankrupted them both. She thought about her empty apartment and emptier bank account. She thought about the coldness in Elliot's eyes when he'd pulled away from her that night, already reaching for his phone before his breathing had even steadied. This was the right choice. The only choice. The doctor entered, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and gentle hands. She didn't lecture or judge, just squeezed the cold gel onto Lydia's abdomen and pressed the ultrasound wand against her skin. The machine hummed to life. And then Lydia heard it. Thump thump, thump thump, thump thump. "There's the heartbeat," the doctor said, adjusting the wand slightly. "Very strong. Let me just—" She paused, her brow furrowing. She moved the wand again, her expression shifting from routine to surprised. "Oh." Lydia's chest tightened. "What? What's wrong?" The doctor moved the wand again, more deliberately this time, her eyes fixed on the screen. When she finally looked at Lydia, her expression was unreadable, professional, carefully neutral. "There's nothing wrong," she said slowly, "but I'm seeing 3 distinct heartbeats. You're carrying triplets." The world tilted sideways. The humming of the machine became a roar in Lydia's ears. 3. Not one impossible situation, but 3. 3 heartbeats, 3 lives, 3 tiny reasons why she could never ever escape Elliot Martin. Because men like him didn't have accidents. They had legacies. They had heirs. They had bloodlines. And she'd just become the mother of his entire future. The doctor was still talking, something about risks and nutrition and specialist referrals. But Lydia couldn't hear anything over the sound of those 3 heartbeats echoing through the small room. She pressed her hand to her stomach, feeling nothing yet but knowing everything had changed. She couldn't do this, couldn't afford 3, could barely breathe, thinking about 1. But as she stared at the grainy black and white image on the screen, at the 3 tiny flickering lights that represented 3 impossible lives, she knew something else too. She couldn't not do this, even if it destroyed her. Lydia's hands were still shaking when she pushed through the clinic's front doors into the weak February sunlight. The cold air hit her face like a slap, but it did nothing to clear the fog in her head. 3 heartbeats. 3 lives. 3 impossible futures she couldn't afford and couldn't escape. She fumbled for her car keys, desperate to get back to her apartment where she could think, could process, could figure out what the hell she was supposed to do now. The parking lot was half empty, her beat-up Honda Civic sitting exactly where she'd left it 2 hours ago. 2 hours ago, when she'd still thought she had a choice. The engine turned over on the 3rd try, sputtering to life with the sick cough it always made in winter. She cranked the heat even though it would take 20 minutes to blow anything warmer than ice, and pulled out onto Capitol Drive. Her mind raced faster than the car ever could. 3 babies. Triplets. The word felt foreign in her mouth, like something that happened to other people. Rich people with support systems and family money and husbands who actually wanted children. Not waitresses who'd made one catastrophic mistake with a man who terrified her. She was 5 blocks away when she noticed the car. Black, sleek, expensive. Following exactly 3 car lengths behind her through every turn, every light. At first, she told herself she was being paranoid. Milwaukee was full of black cars. It didn't mean anything. But when she took a deliberately random turn onto a residential street and the car followed, her heart started hammering against her ribs. No, 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 no. She pressed harder on the gas, her Civic wheezing in protest as she wove through the side streets of West Allis, trying to lose whoever was behind her. But the black car stayed with her, patient and persistent, like a shark tracking blood in the water. Lydia's vision blurred with panic. She thought about calling the police, but what would she even say? That she was being followed by someone who probably worked for the man whose children she was carrying. That the father of her triplets was a known criminal, who owned half the cops in this city anyway. She made a sharp turn onto Wisconsin Avenue, heading toward downtown. If she could just get to a crowded area, somewhere public with witnesses, maybe they'd back off. The Fiserv Forum loomed ahead, the massive arena rising against the gray sky. There was always activity there, people, security, cameras. She'd be safe there. But as she approached the intersection at 4th Street, her blood turned to ice. 3 black SUVs sat blocking the road ahead, arranged in a perfect V formation like something out of a military convoy. Chrome gleamed. Engines idled with predatory patience. And standing in front of the center vehicle, arms crossed over his chest like he had all the time in the world, was Elliot Martin. Lydia slammed on the brakes. Her Civic skidded to a stop 15 feet away, the anti-lock system screaming almost as loud as her racing heart. For one wild second, she considered throwing the car in reverse, but the black sedan that had been following her had already pulled up behind, boxing her in completely. She was trapped. Elliot didn't move. He just stood there in the middle of the intersection wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her yearly rent, his dark hair perfectly styled despite the wind cutting down Wisconsin Avenue. Even from this distance, she could see the set of his jaw, the casual power in his stance. He wasn't angry. He wasn't rushed. He was simply inevitable. 2 men in dark suits materialized from the SUVs, approaching her car with synchronized precision. One tapped on her window with a knuckle. His face was expressionless. "Miss Morgan, Mr. Martin would like a word." It wasn't a request. Lydia's hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed at her to lock the doors, to refuse, to do something, anything other than step out of this car. But she'd lived in Milwaukee long enough to know how this worked. You didn't refuse Elliot Martin. Not unless you wanted to disappear. She killed the engine with shaking hands and stepped out into the cold. Elliot remained perfectly still as she approached, his pale eyes tracking every stumbling step she took toward him. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but she couldn't bring herself to brush it away, couldn't do anything but stare at the man who just hunted her down in broad daylight like it was the most natural thing in the world. When she was close enough to see the flecks of silver in his irises, he finally spoke. "Hello, Lydia." His voice was calm, conversational, like they'd just run into each other at a coffee shop instead of in the middle of a blocked intersection. "Interesting morning you're having." She couldn't find her voice. Her throat had closed up completely. Elliot tilted his head slightly, studying her the way a scientist might study something under a microscope. "You look surprised to see me. You shouldn't be. I've had someone on you since the wedding. Did you really think I'd let you walk away without insurance?" The words hit her like a physical blow. 6 weeks. He'd had someone following her for 6 weeks. Watching her go to work, come home, live her pathetic little life. Watching her take that pregnancy test. Watching her make the appointment at the clinic. Watching everything. "You're insane," she whispered, finding her voice at last. You can't what?" He stepped closer, and she instinctively backed up until her spine hit the hood of her Civic. He didn't touch her, didn't need to. His presence alone was suffocating. "Can't protect my investment? Can't keep track of what's mine? I'm not yours?" Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe, or warning. "No," he agreed quietly, "but they are." Lydia's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. "How did you... You thought you could walk into a clinic in my city and I wouldn't know within 5 minutes." Elliot's voice dropped to something dangerously soft. "The receptionist called my people before you'd finished filling out the paperwork. The nurse texted updates during your exam. And the doctor? He smiled, and it was the coldest thing Lydia had ever seen. She's been on my payroll for 3 years. The world tilted again. The kind doctor with the tired eyes, the gentle hands, the carefully neutral expression when she'd seen the ultrasound. She'd been reporting to him the entire time. "Congratulations, Lydia," Elliot said, his pale eyes boring into hers. "Triplets. That's quite the accomplishment. Now, get in the car. We have a lot to discuss." Before we see what Elliot does when he gets Lydia back to the estate, hit that subscribe button if you're hooked on this story. Real talk, if you were Lydia, would you have tried to run or stayed for the protection? Drop it in the comments because I actually read every single one. Also, where are you watching from? Milwaukee? London? Somewhere I can't even pronounce? Let me know. I love seeing this community show up from all corners of the planet. All right, back to the story. The drive to Lake Geneva took 90 minutes, but it felt like crossing into another dimension. Lydia sat wedged between 2 silent men in suits who smelled like gun oil and expensive cologne. Elliot rode ahead, his silhouette visible through the tinted windows, phone glued to his ear the entire way. Conducting business, running his empire. Probably deciding her fate while she sat there like cargo. They left Milwaukee's urban sprawl behind, trading cramped houses and industrial parks for sprawling farmland, and then, finally, the frozen shoreline of Geneva Lake. The mansions here didn't whisper wealth, they screamed it. Massive estates sat behind iron gates and stone walls, their lawns buried under perfect snow that nobody actually had to shovel themselves. Old money, new money. And according to the rumors Lydia had heard while serving cocktails at wedding receptions, blood money. The SUV turned onto a private drive marked only by a discreet number on a limestone pillar. The gate swung open automatically, and Lydia's breath caught. Elliot Martin's estate wasn't a house. It was a statement. 3 stories of dark brick and towering windows rose against the winter sky, all sharp angles and modern glass mixed with old-world stonework. The circular drive wrapped around a fountain that had been drained for winter, and beyond the house she could see the frozen lake stretching toward the horizon. Beautiful, intimidating, a fortress disguised as a home. The car stopped, and one of the suits opened her door. The cold air sliced through her thin jacket, the same jacket she'd worn to the clinic that morning, back when her biggest problem was figuring out how to afford one baby. Elliot was already at the front entrance, his suit jacket unbuttoned, looking like some dark prince surveying his kingdom. He didn't smile when she approached, just gestured toward the massive doors. "Welcome home, Lydia." The words made her stomach turn. "This isn't my home." It is now. Inside was worse. No, not worse. More seductive, more dangerous. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers. A grand staircase curved upward, its banister wrought iron and polished wood. Everywhere she looked screamed luxury, the quiet kind that cost more than she could fathom. A woman in her 50s appeared from a side hallway, silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, black slacks and crisp white blouse. She had the bearing of someone who'd seen everything and judged most of it. "This is Petra," Elliot said. "She runs the house. Anything you need, ask her." Petra's sharp eyes assessed Lydia in one sweep. Discount store jeans, worn jacket, barely concealed terror. But when she spoke, her voice was surprisingly gentle. "Welcome, Miss Morgan. I've prepared the East Wing suite for you. Would you like to rest?" Lydia wanted to laugh. Rest. As if she could rest knowing she was a prisoner with the father of her children, standing 5 feet away, watching her like a particularly valuable acquisition. "I want to go home," she said, hating how her voice shook. Elliot's expression didn't change. "Petra, Give us a moment." The older woman disappeared, leaving Lydia alone with Elliot in that cavernous entryway. He took a step closer, and she forced herself not to retreat. "Let me be crystal clear about something," he said quietly. "You're carrying 3 Martin heirs. That makes you the most valuable person in my world right now. You understand what that means? That I'm your prisoner. That you're protected." His pale eyes held hers. "There are people in this city, in this state, in this country, who'd pay a fortune to get their hands on you. To hurt what's mine. To end the Martin line before it even begins. So yes, you're staying here, where I have 24-hour security, medical staff on call, and every resource you could possibly need. I don't want your resources. I want my life back. Your life was a 600-square-foot apartment and $800 in the bank. Your life was one emergency away from complete collapse." He stepped closer. "I'm offering you something better. For you and for them." His hand moved toward her stomach but stopped short, hovering in the air between them like he was afraid to touch her. The gesture was so unexpected, so human, that something cracked in Lydia's armor. "Why do you even care?" she whispered. "You barely know me." "I know enough." His hand dropped. "And they're mine. That's all that matters, not ours. Mine." Like she was just the incubator, like she didn't matter beyond the 3 lives growing inside her. Before she could respond, voices echoed from deeper in the house. 2 men emerged from what looked like a study, one older with silver streaking his dark hair, the other younger, late 20s with the kind of pretty boy face that probably got him anything he wanted. "So, this is her," the older man said, looking Lydia up and down with undisguised interest. "The infamous Lydia Morgan. You've caused quite the stir, sweetheart." "Back off, Vincent," Elliot said, his tone carrying a warning that made the older man smirk. "Just being friendly." Vincent's eyes glittered with something predatory. "After all, she's family now, isn't she? Or at least she will be once those babies are born." The younger man hung back, studying Lydia with different intensity. Less predatory, more calculating. "You should know," he said quietly, "that Chicago isn't happy about this development. The Morellis have been waiting for an opening, and a pregnant woman makes for a very tempting target." "Marcus," Elliot's voice was ice, but Marcus continued, eyes on Lydia. "There's a war coming, has been for months, and you just became the most valuable asset in it. The minute Chicago finds out about the triplets, they already know." Vincent interrupted with a sharp laugh. "We've got a leak somewhere, probably someone on the medical staff at that clinic. So congratulations, sweetheart. You're not just carrying the Martin heirs, you're carrying the reason people are about to die." The room spun. Lydia gripped the edge of a nearby table, knuckles white. War, targets, leaks. This wasn't just about Elliot's obsession with his bloodline. This was about survival. Violence she couldn't begin to understand. "Get out," Elliot said quietly, "both of you, now." Vincent and Marcus exchanged glances but obeyed, disappearing back into the depths of the house. The silence they left behind was suffocating. Lydia looked at Elliot, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't noticed before. Tension in his jaw. Shadows under his eyes. The weight of an empire pressing down on shoulders that refused to bend. "I need," she started, but the words cut off as her stomach lurched violently. The morning sickness hit like a freight train. She'd been fighting it all day, pushing it down through sheer force of will, but her body had reached its limit. She doubled over, one hand pressed to her mouth, desperately trying not to vomit on the marble floor. Elliot moved faster than she'd thought possible. His hand was suddenly on her back, steadying her, guiding her toward a nearby bathroom she hadn't even noticed. She barely made it to the toilet before her stomach emptied itself, heaving up the nothing she'd managed to eat that morning. She expected him to leave, to be disgusted, to remember she was just the vessel. Instead, he stayed. He gathered her hair, back with surprisingly gentle hands, holding it while she retched and shook and tried not to cry from sheer humiliation. When the worst passed, he dampened a washcloth with cool water and pressed it to the back of her neck. "Breathe," he said quietly. "Just breathe." Lydia leaned against the cool porcelain, exhausted and empty. She felt Elliot's hand still on her back, a steady presence that should have terrified her but somehow didn't. Not in that moment. "This is what the next 7 months look like," she whispered hoarsely. "Me falling apart while you stand there and watch." His hand stilled. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Almost human. "Then I'll be there every time you fall," he said. "And I'll make sure you don't hit the ground." Lydia turned her head to look at him. This dangerous man kneeling on a bathroom floor beside her, his expensive suit probably ruined, his careful mask slipping just enough for her to see something underneath. Not kindness exactly, but maybe the capacity for it. "Why?" she asked. "Why does this matter so much to you?" Elliot's pale eyes met hers, and for just a second, she saw something raw flash across his face. Pain, maybe, or loneliness, or the ghost of something he'd lost long ago. "Because," he said quietly, "I'm building something that lasts, something that survives me, and you're the only person who can give me that." He stood, offering her his hand. She stared at it for a long moment, this hand that had probably killed, that had built an empire on blood and fear, that was now reaching for her with unexpected gentleness. Finally, she took it, and let him pull her to her feet in the gilded cage that was now her home. 3 weeks passed, and Lydia learned the rhythms of captivity dressed as luxury. Breakfast at 8, prepared by a chef whose soufflés probably cost more than her old rent. Prenatal yoga with an instructor who drove up from Chicago twice a week. Doctor's appointments in a medical suite Elliot had built on the 3rd floor, complete with ultrasound equipment and a physician who lived in the guest house. Everything she could possibly need, except the one thing she wanted: freedom. She'd stopped fighting after the first week. What was the point? The estate was surrounded by walls and cameras and men with guns who nodded politely when she passed, but would absolutely stop her if she tried to leave. Besides, where would she go? Back to her apartment, where Chicago's Morelli crew could snatch her off the street. At least here, the babies were safe. The babies. She'd started thinking of them that way, not as some abstract concept, but as real, living things. 3 tiny heartbeats getting stronger every day. 3 lives depending on her to keep breathing, keep eating, keep existing even when everything in her wanted to shut down. Elliot was gone most days, conducting business in Milwaukee. He'd call every few hours. Checking in, he called it, though. Lydia knew it was really making sure she hadn't tried anything stupid. But at night he always returned. Always knocked on her door to ask how she was feeling. Always stood in the hallway with that careful distance between them, like he was afraid of what might happen if he got too close. She'd caught him once, late at night, standing outside her room with his hand pressed flat against the door. Just standing there in the dark, like he was trying to feel her presence through the wood. She'd pretended to be asleep when he finally walked away. On the 23rd day, everything changed. Lydia was in the library, a 2-story cathedral of books that smelled like leather and old paper, when Petra found her. The older woman's face was carefully neutral, but Lydia had learned to read the tiny tells, the slight tension around her mouth, the way her hands clasped just a bit too tightly. "Mr. Martin had to return to Milwaukee unexpectedly," Petra said. "He asked me to let you know he'll be back by dinner." "What happened?" "Business." The word was a wall. Petra never elaborated on Elliot's business, and Lydia had learned not to ask. "He wanted me to remind you that you're not to leave the estate under any circumstances. Security protocols are in full effect." Something cold crawled down Lydia's spine. "Is something wrong?" Petra's mask slipped for just a second. Fear flashed in her eyes before she locked it down. "Just precautionary. I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything." She left before Lydia could press further, her footsteps echoing down the marble hallway with unusual speed. Lydia stood in the library, surrounded by thousands of books, and felt the weight of the silence pressing down. Something was wrong. Something had changed. She was right. They came at 2 in the afternoon, when the February sun was already descending toward the frozen lake. Lydia was upstairs, lying down because the morning sickness had evolved into all-day nausea that left her exhausted and hollow. She'd just closed her eyes when she heard it. Gunfire. Not the distant pop of hunting rifles, but the sharp, rapid crack of automatic weapons. Close. Too close. Lydia bolted upright, heart hammering. More gunfire, shouting, breaking glass from somewhere below. Her door burst open. Not Petra, but one of Elliot's men. She thought his name was Thomas, the younger guard who sometimes smiled at her in the mornings. But he wasn't smiling now. His face was white, blood on his shoulder. "Panic room," he gasped. "Now! They breached the south entrance." Lydia didn't ask questions. She ran. Thomas led her down the hallway at a dead sprint, past the grand staircase where more gunfire echoed from below. She caught a glimpse of the entryway, black-clad figures pouring through the shattered front doors, Elliot's security team falling back. One of the intruders looked up and saw her. He smiled. "Move." Thomas shoved her toward a door she'd never noticed, hidden behind a bookshelf in the east wing. His fingers flew over a keypad. The door hissed open, revealing a small reinforced room with concrete walls and a bank of security monitors. "Get inside, lock it behind me. Don't open it for anyone except Mr. Martin. You understand? No one." "What about you?" "I'm buying you time." He pushed her inside and she stumbled into the panic room. The door was already closing when she heard him chamber around. "Tell Mr. Martin." The door sealed shut with a hydraulic hiss, cutting off whatever Thomas had been about to say. Lydia stood in the sudden silence, breath coming in ragged gasps, staring at the security monitors mounted on the wall. The screens showed hell. Men in tactical gear were sweeping through the mansion room by room, methodical and professional. Elliot's security team was fighting back, but they were outnumbered. On one screen, she watched Petra barricade herself in the kitchen. On another, she saw 2 intruders dragging an unconscious guard toward the front door. They weren't just attacking, they were searching for her. The East Wing monitor showed Thomas taking position at the end of the hallway, the hidden door now concealed behind the bookshelf. 3 men appeared around the corner. Thomas didn't hesitate. He opened fire, and Lydia watched him die protecting a door the intruders didn't even know existed. She pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle the scream. The minutes crawled past like hours. On the monitors, she watched the intruders tear through the mansion, opening every door, checking every closet. One of them spoke into a radio, and though there was no audio, Lydia could read the frustration on his face. They couldn't find her. The panic room was working, but for how long? She sank to the floor, wrapping her arms around her knees, feeling the 3 lives inside her fluttering like trapped birds. This was her fault. If she'd never gone to that wedding, never let Elliot pull her into that coat check room, never gotten pregnant, none of this would be happening. Thomas would still be alive. Petra wouldn't be hiding, terrified. This mansion wouldn't be a war zone. The security monitors flickered. One screen went dark, then another. Someone was cutting the feeds. Lydia was about to lose her only window when the front entrance camera caught movement. Black SUVs, 4 of them, screaming up the circular drive with a recklessness that tore up the perfect snow. They didn't slow down, didn't park. They just stopped, and armed men poured out like a flood. But these men wore different tactical gear, and leading them, striding toward the shattered entrance with a weapon in one hand and murder in his eyes, was Elliot Martin. Lydia had never seen him like this. The careful businessman, the controlled crime lord, the man who'd held her hair while she vomited, all gone. What walked through those doors was something primal and terrifying. A winter storm given human form. The remaining security feeds showed chaos. Elliot's reinforcements hit the intruders like a hammer, and suddenly the hunters became the hunted. The tactical gear didn't save them. The superior numbers didn't matter. Elliot moved through his mansion like death itself, and everything in his path fell. On one monitor, she watched him corner 3 men in the dining room. They tried to surrender. He shot them anyway. On another screen, he grabbed one of the intruders by the throat and slammed him against the marble until something cracked. This wasn't defense. This was annihilation. The panic room door's keypad beeped. Lydia scrambled backward, pressing herself against the far wall. The door hissed open. Elliot stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway lights, suit torn and blood-stained, weapon still in his hand. For a terrifying moment, he didn't look like the man she knew. He looked like the monster she'd been running from. Then his eyes found her, curled up on the floor with her arms wrapped protectively around her stomach, and something in his expression shattered. Lydia. Her name came out broken. He dropped the weapon and crossed the room in 3 strides, falling to his knees in front of her. His hands hovered over her like he was afraid she might break. "Did they touch you? Did they hurt you?" She shook her head, unable to find words. "Thomas," she finally whispered. "He saved me. I know." Elliot's jaw clenched. "I saw." His hands finally settled on her shoulders, gentle, despite the violence still radiating from him. He was shaking, she realized. This man who'd just torn through his own house like an avenging angel was shaking as he touched her. "I should have been here," he said, voice rough. "I should have. Someone leaked your location. Someone in my organization sold you out to the Morellis. If I'd been 5 minutes later, but you weren't." Lydia's hand moved to cover his, and she felt the blood on his knuckles. "You came back. I'll always come back." His pale eyes bore into hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "You understand that? I will burn this entire city to ash before I let anyone take you from me." "The babies," she started. "You mean the babies?" "No." His other hand moved to cup her face, tilting her head up so she had no choice but to meet his gaze. "You, Lydia. The heirs matter, but you—" He stopped, something raw and unguarded flashing across his face. "I can't lose you. I won't." The words hung between them in that concrete room, more terrifying than any gun, any threat, any violence she'd witnessed on those monitors, because this wasn't about bloodlines or empires or Martin heirs anymore. This was about something far more dangerous. Elliot Martin had stopped seeing her as a vessel, and somewhere in the past 3 weeks, trapped in his gilded cage, watching him stand outside her door at night, feeling his hands gentle on her back while she fell apart, Lydia had stopped seeing him as just a monster. "Take me upstairs," she whispered, exhausted and terrified and so tired of fighting. "Please, I can't be in here anymore." Elliot gathered her into his arms like she weighed nothing, carrying her out of the panic room and through the mansion that now bore the scars of war. She pressed her face against his chest and tried not to look at the bodies, tried not to think about Thomas dying in the hallway, tried not to acknowledge the truth crystallizing with every beat of her heart. She wasn't his prisoner anymore. She was something infinitely more complicated, and there was no escape from that. The mansion spent the night bleeding. Crews came to remove the bodies, to repair the shattered glass, to scrub blood from marble floors. Lydia watched it all from the window of her suite, wrapped in a blanket that couldn't quite warm the cold that had settled into her bones. Elliot had left her there with 2 guards posted outside. For protection, he'd said, though she suspected it was also to keep her from seeing the full extent of the cleanup operation happening below. She didn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Thomas falling, saw the intruders searching room by room, saw the look on Elliot's face when he'd found her in the panic room, that raw, unguarded moment when she'd glimpsed something beneath the crime lord exterior. Dawn came gray and cold over the frozen lake. Lydia was still at the window when she heard the knock. "Come in," she said, knowing it would be him. Elliot entered looking like he hadn't slept either. He'd changed, black slacks and a charcoal sweater that made his pale eyes even more striking. But there were still shadows under those eyes, still tension in every line of his body. He closed the door and stood there, uncharacteristically uncertain. "How are you feeling?" "I don't know." It was the most honest answer she could give. "Numb, maybe. Scared. I can't stop thinking about—" Her voice broke. "He died protecting me, Thomas. He didn't even hesitate. He knew what he signed up for." Elliot's voice was rough. "They all do." "Does that make it better?" "No." He crossed to the window, standing beside her to look out at the lake. "Nothing makes it better. But it was his choice, and he made it because you matter. The babies matter. Stop saying that." Elliot turned to face her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Stop reducing yourself to what you're carrying. Yes, the heirs matter, but so do you, Lydia, so do you." She didn't know what to say to that, didn't know how to process the way he was looking at her, like she was something precious and irreplaceable, not just a means to an end. "I found the leak," he continued, voice hardening. "Dr. Morrison, the physician I hired for your care, the Morellis paid him $50,000 for your location and medical information. He's been reporting your condition since the first ultrasound." Lydia's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. "The doctor who examined me here? Who told me the babies were healthy? He's been dealt with." The coldness in those 3 words told her everything she needed to know about Dr. Morrison's fate. "But it means my organization isn't secure. Not secure enough. Which is why I need you to move into my wing, into my bedroom." "What?" "For your safety." He said it quickly, like he'd been rehearsing the argument. "My suite has additional security measures. Reinforced walls, a second panic room, biometric locks. After yesterday, I can't—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "I can't risk you being vulnerable, not again. So I go from a gilded cage to an even smaller one? You go from my protection to my direct protection." Elliot stepped closer, and she could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with something darker. Gunpowder, maybe, or blood he hadn't quite washed away. "There's a difference, Lydia. Yesterday proved that." She wanted to argue, wanted to fight this new boundary he was trying to erase, but the exhaustion weighing down her bones was too heavy, and the fear still crawling under her skin was too raw. She'd almost died yesterday. The babies had almost died. And Elliot had torn through his own house like an avenging angel to save her. Not just the heirs. Her. "Okay," she whispered. Surprise flickered across his face. "Okay? What choice do I have?" But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't about choice anymore. Somewhere in the past 3 weeks, maybe in that bathroom when he'd held her hair, or in the panic room when he'd looked at her like losing her would destroy him, something had shifted. The hatred she'd been clinging to had started to crack, and underneath it was something far more dangerous. Understanding, maybe, or the beginning of something that felt terrifyingly close to trust. Elliot helped her pack her things, the few belongings she'd accumulated in 3 weeks of captivity. Maternity clothes Petra had ordered, books from the library, the stuffed rabbit one of the guards had bought her as a joke, claiming every expectant mother needed something ridiculous. Elliot carried everything himself, refusing to call for help, like this was something too intimate to share with anyone else. His suite was on the opposite wing, facing the lake with floor-to-ceiling windows that should have made her feel exposed, but somehow didn't. The bedroom was massive, all dark wood and leather furniture, unmistakably masculine. But there was a sitting area by the windows, and Elliot had already set up a space for her there. A comfortable chair, a side table with books and magazines, everything positioned to catch the best light. He'd been planning this, preparing for it. "You take the bed," he said, setting her suitcase down. "I'll sleep in the sitting room." "Elliot, I can't take your—" "You can and you will." His tone left no room for argument. "The bed is more comfortable, and you need proper rest, for yourself and for them." Lydia looked around this new prison that didn't quite feel like one, at the care he'd taken to make a space for her, at the way he was still standing by the door, maintaining that careful distance like he was afraid of what might happen if he got too close. "I should hate you," she said quietly, "for taking me, for trapping me here, for turning my life into this. I should hate you. But you don't. It wasn't a question. I don't know what I feel anymore." She sank into the chair he'd chosen for her, exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with pregnancy. "You're a criminal. You've killed people. You're holding me here against my will. But you also," her voice caught, "you held my hair while I was sick. You came back for me yesterday. You look at me like I'm more than just an incubator for your heirs." Elliot finally moved closer, kneeling in front of her chair so they were at eye level. His hand came up to rest gently on her stomach, feeling the slight swell that was just beginning to show. "You are more," he said softly. "You're the heart of everything I'm building. And not just because of what you're carrying, but because of who you are. Stubborn and brave and so damn determined to survive even when everything is stacked against you." His pale eyes met hers. "I brought you here for the heirs, but I'm keeping you here for me." The words hung between them, dangerous and raw, and undeniably true. Lydia covered his hand with hers, feeling the warmth of his palm against her skin, and knew she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. She wasn't his prisoner anymore. She was something far more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. She was his. And somewhere in the past 3 weeks, in the moments between fear and captivity and unexpected tenderness, he'd become hers too. Not in the way she'd ever imagined wanting someone. Not with romance or courtship or anything resembling normal. But in the way that mattered when you'd seen someone at their darkest and they'd still chosen to be gentle with you. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Of me? Of this? Of what we're becoming?" She looked down at their joined hands resting on her stomach. Of the fact that I can't hate you anymore, even though I should. Elliot's other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with a tenderness that felt like a betrayal of everything she thought she knew about him. "Then don't hate me," he said. "Don't fight this. Let me protect you. Let me—" He stopped, something vulnerable flashing in his eyes. "Let me try to be more than the monster you think I am." Lydia leaned into his touch, too tired to fight anymore, too confused by her own tangled feelings to know what was right. "I don't think you're a monster," she admitted. "Not anymore. That's what terrifies me." He pulled her forward gently, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that felt like both a promise and a claim. She pressed her face against his shoulder and let herself break, just for a moment, just in this room where no one else could see. And Elliot held her together, the way he'd promised he would, in the heart of an empire built on blood and violence, and now, impossibly, something that felt dangerously close to love. Lydia went into that clinic to sever the tie, but she ended up becoming the most protected woman in Wisconsin. 3 weeks in a gilded cage turned into something neither of them expected, a bond forged in violence, tenderness, and the 3 lives growing between them. But the Chicago crew isn't done. The Morellis lost men in that attack, and they don't forgive. They don't forget, and they're willing to wait for the perfect moment to strike. That moment comes sooner than anyone expects. At 28 weeks, Lydia wakes up in the middle of the night with contractions that shouldn't be happening. The triplets are coming early, dangerously early. And as Elliot races her through a winter storm to the one hospital he trusts, the Morellis make their move. Because the most vulnerable Elliot Martin will ever be is when the woman he loves and the heirs to his empire are fighting for their lives. Part 2 of the Martin Bloodline drops next. Click the link on your screen or check the playlist to see what happens when the Martin heirs are finally born, when Chicago makes its final play, and when Lydia has to decide once and for all. Is she a prisoner in Elliot's world, or has she become its queen? If you enjoyed this story, smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss Part 2. Drop a comment and let me know. Do you think Lydia made the right choice staying with Elliot, or should she have kept running? And don't forget to tell me where you're watching from. This community spans the globe, and I love seeing all your comments roll in. Thanks for listening to Part 1 of the Martin Bloodline. I'll see you in the next one, where everything Elliot and Lydia have built together will be tested in ways neither of them saw coming. Until then, stay safe out there. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous prisons are the ones we stop wanting to escape from.